They said it would be a short walk, just a quiet Sunday picnic before the weather turned cold. David smiled at me through the windshield, his teeth too bright, too rehearsed. Camille sat beside him, humming to the radio, her nails tapping against the plastic lid of the cooler. We drove past the last gas station for miles, down roads that narrowed until only one car could pass. I should have known then, but mothers always choose belief first. When we stopped, the air smelled of pine and damp soil. "Sit there, Mom," David said gently, pointing at a fallen redwood. "We'll grab the basket." His voice was steady, but his eyes didn't meet mine. Camille laughed, soft and polite. "It's just too heavy. We'll be right back." The words were casual, like small pebbles skipping across a lake. And then I heard the truck start. I thought maybe they were turning it around. I thought maybe they were playing a joke. But the sound faded, and the forest filled the silence where laughter should have been. I waited. 10 minutes, then 20. I counted my breaths, the way I used to calm the children at story hour back when I was still a librarian. At 40 minutes, I whispered their names. At an hour, I knew. I wasn't lost. I was left. The shame came first, thick and choking. I replayed every conversation that morning. Did I criticize Camille's cooking again? Did I forget David's birthday? Maybe they were angry. Maybe this was just a punishment that went too far. But when I reached for my purse and found it empty, no phone, no ID, not even my keys, the shame gave way to something sharper. They didn't forget me. They planned this. My hips screamed as I tried to stand. The pain was white and alive. I gripped a root and pulled myself upright, breath burning my chest. I had no direction, no water, just the hiss of wind through the trees. "Okay, Margaret," I said aloud, voice trembling. "Think." But my thoughts came slow now, scattered like dry leaves. Once, I could recite library codes by memory. Now, I couldn't remember if the sun set west of Cedar Ridge or east. But I knew betrayal. That never fades. The forest was beautiful in a cruel way, gold light filtering through red trunks, moss soft as secrets. Each step was a negotiation between will and agony. I walked anyway, because if I stayed, I'd die where they wanted me to. And if I moved, maybe I'd die on my own terms. I followed the sound of wind until it became the sound of water. My husband Henry used to say, "If you're ever lost, find the stream. Water means direction." He'd been gone 8 years, but his voice came clear as ever, guiding me between the trees. When I reached the creek, I knelt, scooped cold water into my hands, and drank until my lips stung. By the time the sun began to sink, I found a small hollow under a pine and crawled inside. My bones ached, but my rage kept me warm. They thought the forest would take me. They thought I'd vanish like an old book gone out of print. But I was still here. I pressed my palm against the dirt, whispering to the earth itself, "If I make it out, they'll see me again, and they'll wish they hadn't." I didn't sleep. I just watched the darkness grow, felt it breathe. Somewhere above, an owl called. I closed my eyes and imagined my house on Maple Lane, the smell of Henry's coffee, the sound of rain on the roof. I imagined what David might be saying now, how he'd practice his story for the police, how Camille would cry on cue. My heart didn't break, it hardened. So if you're here reading this, stay with me. Don't look away when it gets hard. I've already been forgotten once, and I don't plan on being erased again. If you feel something, anger, grief, the spark of survival, then don't leave either. I'm glad you're here. Stay until the end. And when you do, promise me one thing. You'll never let anyone decide when your story is over. Morning came like an accusation. Thin light pressing through the branches. Too clean for what it revealed. My sweatshirt was damp with dew. My hands blistered from gripping bark. The air smelled of iron and pine. Somewhere far off, water trickled through stones. I stood slowly, my hips stiff, my body heavy as a soaked quilt. When Henry and I used to hike, he'd joke that I navigated by stubbornness. Maybe he was right. That morning, stubbornness was all I had. I leaned against a tree and whispered, "Follow the water." His voice echoed in memory. Creeks lead to rivers. Rivers lead to people. I walked toward the sound until the ground softened under my shoes. The creek shimmered like a silver thread through the forest floor. I knelt again, cupped water into my mouth, and let it sting my cracked lips. For a second, I almost thanked the world for not finishing me off. Every sound became suspect: the rustle of a squirrel, the thump of falling pine cones, the creak of my own breath. The forest was both merciful and cruel. It gave me air and silence, food and emptiness. It didn't care if I lived. By noon, the shame had burned away, leaving only the truth. They wanted me gone. They'd been planning it. 2 weeks ago, Camille had offered to help clean out the trunk of my old sedan. She'd smiled, sweet as syrup, when she threw out my flashlight, blanket, and first aid kit. "You don't need all that survival junk, Mom," she said. "You're not driving long trips anymore." And David, my boy, had asked about my insurance with that casual voice people use when they've already decided on something. "Just making sure your affairs are in order," he said. The words landed like stones in my chest. Now, sitting beside that cold creek, I saw them for what they were: rehearsals for murder disguised as care. The forest thickened, branches clawing my sleeves. Each step tore another thread of my resolve, but I kept moving. I remembered the librarian's oath: quiet persistence, order in chaos. Even now, it was my creed. If I stopped, I'd become another forgotten file in a system that never looked twice at old women. When the sun reached its peak, I rested under a fir. My stomach groaned. I chewed a few pine needles just to trick my body into thinking it was eating. The bitterness woke something ancient in me, a kind of primitive clarity. "Think, Margaret," I whispered. "Don't die their way." The forest answered with a gust that bent the treetops, a low hum threading through leaves like a whisper. "Move," I obeyed. My hip throbbed with every step, my shoes squelched in mud, but I followed that whisper until the trees opened into a slope of moss-covered boulders. For the first time, I saw the sky pale blue and merciless. I felt small, but not helpless. I realized then that what I felt wasn't fear. It was recognition. The world had always belonged to people like David and Camille, the ones who spoke softly while taking everything. Out here, the trees didn't lie. The dirt didn't flatter. It simply told the truth. You live if you keep moving. I walked until the shadows grew long again. My leg buckled once, twice, but I didn't stop. When I reached a clearing, I leaned against a rock and looked west. The horizon burned orange behind the trees. I took a slow breath and whispered, "West, always west." That was the direction of roads, of towns, of people who still believed in mercy. And if mercy wasn't waiting, then justice would do. The night fell like a shutter, quick and absolute. One moment, there was the thin gold of sunset glinting off the creek. The next, only the hush of darkness settling between the trunks. I gathered what little courage daylight had left me and crawled beneath the low branches of a pine. The air turned brittle and sharp. Somewhere in the distance, something howled, lonely, not close enough to fear, just enough to remind me I was food if I stayed too still. I pulled my sweatshirt tight around my ribs, tracing the outlines of my hands beneath the fabric. They looked foreign, scraped, swollen, old. Maybe that was the truest part of me now. Age stripped of its grace, survival stripped of dignity, just bones and willpower. I tried to think about warmth. I thought of Henry again, the way he'd whistle when he built a fire, soft and tuneless. He always said flame was a companion, not a weapon. I whispered his name into the dark, and for an instant, I swore I heard a low hum answer me. Maybe it was the wind threading through branches, maybe not, but I held on to it anyway. It gave me something to talk to. Sleep never came. Only moments of drifting where memory replaced reality. I saw David's face at 6 years old, grinning, holding up a frog he'd caught in a jar. "Don't let it suffocate," I'd warned. He promised he wouldn't. He forgot the next day. The frog died quietly in its glass prison. Even back then, he could pretend guilt away. When the moon rose, pale and fractured through the canopy, I pressed my palm to the dirt and spoke softly. "You raised him, Margaret. You made him kind once." So what changed? The question hurt because I already knew. Love had turned into convenience. He'd learned to see people as stepping stones, and I'd let him use me for years because that's what mothers do. They forgive, even when forgiveness becomes fuel for cruelty. Hours bled into one another. The cold drilled deeper, until my thoughts became simple. Move, breathe, endure. The forest's rhythm began to echo in my bones, each gust of wind, a heartbeat, each rustle a reminder that everything alive fights to stay that way. I thought of my library then, the place I'd spent half my life in. I used to tell young mothers to bring their children for story time because books taught empathy before the world erased it. Somewhere along the way, I stopped believing my own sermons. Sitting there under the pine, I wondered when I stopped writing my own story and started living inside theirs. I whispered to the dark, "I am not done." The sound surprised me. It was steady, not a plea but a vow. The trees didn't answer, but the silence felt less like indifference and more like witness. When the first light seeped into the forest, cold and gray, I forced myself upright. My knees cracked, my hip ached like metal grinding, but I was still moving. I followed the same creek Henry would have trusted, watched the mist curl off the water like breath from a giant's mouth. A woodpecker drummed somewhere far away a heartbeat I could borrow. The forest seemed endless, but so did I. Every step was a small rebellion against the quiet grave they'd chosen for me. By mid-morning, I stumbled upon a patch of wild blackberries. Most were shriveled, but a few still glistened with dew. I ate greedily, juice staining my fingers and tongue. It was the sweetest thing I'd tasted since betrayal. My throat tightened not from hunger this time, but from gratitude, raw and humbling. I sat in the dirt and whispered, "You should have made sure I was dead, David." The words were not vengeance. They were prophecy. The sun climbed higher, burning through the morning haze. I knew then that if I survived this, I'd never be small again. I'd never apologize for taking up space in the world I'd built with my own hands. I pressed my palm to my heart, feeling it hammer like a stubborn engine, and smiled through cracked lips. "Still here," I said to no one and everyone, "still here." By the second day, pain had stopped being pain. It became something else, a rhythm, a metronome of survival. Every movement sent it pulsing through me, but I no longer fought it. It was proof that I hadn't vanished yet. The forest around me thickened as I followed the water westward. I used a fallen branch as a makeshift cane, dragging my bad leg over roots slick with moss. The air was damp and metallic. Somewhere, unseen insects buzzed like distant wires. I wondered how many days it would take before the world started wondering where I'd gone, if anyone would at all. When I reached a bend in the creek, I stopped. There was a wide rock, flat and smooth, catching the morning light. I sat, careful, bones aching. Across the water, a deer lifted its head, eyes wide and still. We watched each other for a long time. Then it stepped into the stream, walked through the current like it had done this 1,000 times, and vanished into the green. "Show off," I whispered, smiling for the first time since the truck drove away. The sound startled me, a real laugh, small and broken. I'd forgotten what my own voice sounded like when it wasn't pleading or apologizing. It made me remember something Henry once said when I was still young enough to take comfort for granted. Nature doesn't care who you were yesterday, only who you choose to be when the sun rises. When the sun rose that morning, I had chosen to be stubborn. By midday, I came across the remnants of a camp, burnt logs, a crushed soda can, and the faint scent of smoke buried under damp leaves. I touched the ashes. They were cold. Whoever had been here was long gone, but the sight of something human set my pulse racing. I wasn't alone in the world. Civilization was close. That's when I found it. A candy wrapper caught in the roots of a fern, purple and shiny like treasure. I picked it up, smoothed it out, and held it to my chest. It wasn't just litter, it was proof of people, proof of roads, proof of survival. I folded it carefully into my pocket, a talisman against despair. But hope is a cruel companion. It moves fast and leaves quietly. An hour later, the ground turned steep and uneven. My right leg gave out halfway up the slope. I fell hard face first into the dirt. For a long time, I couldn't move. I just lay there listening to the faint hum of water, the whisper of leaves. "Get up," I said aloud. "Come on, Margaret, get up." I imagined Henry beside me, his warm hand on my shoulder. I could almost hear his voice steady, amused. "You were never the type to stay down, sweetheart." It wasn't real, but I still answered him. "You're right, I'm not." I rolled onto my back, groaning, and stared up at the canopy. Shafts of sunlight sliced through the branches. Dust floated in the beams like stars underwater. It was too beautiful a sky to die under. I forced myself up. My head spun, my palms stung, my ribs felt bruised. But the pain grounded me. It reminded me that I was alive, and being alive was enough reason to keep walking. Hours later, I heard something new, a faint hum, low and steady, like breath through metal. I froze, heart hammering. For a second, I thought it might be a car. I strained to listen. The sound faded, then returned. Not a car. Maybe the wind trapped in a ravine. Maybe imagination. But it pulled me forward anyway. I followed the noise until the trees began to thin, and there, between two mossy ridges, stood a shape, a cabin, old and sunken, half-eaten by the forest. The roof sagged. The windows were black holes. But it was shelter. And for now, that was enough. Inside, the air was heavy with rot and time. A rusted cot leaned against the far wall. An empty lantern sat on the floor, its glass cracked. I touched it gently, the way you'd touch something sacred. Someone had lived here once. Someone had survived. I lowered myself onto the cot and let my eyes close for a moment. The smell of mildew didn't matter. The cold didn't matter. For the first time since that morning on the log, I felt something close to peace. I whispered into the dark. They thought I'd disappear. My voice cracked, but I smiled. They underestimated what it takes to erase a woman like me. Then, softer, almost like a prayer, if I crawl out of this forest alive, they'll never see the world the same again. Outside, the wind rose through the pines, and for a fleeting instant, it sounded like applause. When I woke, the forest light was thinner, gray streaks slicing through the cracks in the cabin roof. My body had stiffened into a single ache. I tried to sit, but the pain in my hip flared like lightning. For a long time, I stayed still, just listening. A drip of water from somewhere above, a distant bird, the faint scrape of a branch against the wall. The world outside was indifferent. Inside, I was a ghost trying to remember her own name. I ran a finger through the dust on the floorboards and found the shape of an old boot print, faint but human. Someone had been here once. The thought steadied me. I wasn't the first person to be swallowed by these trees, and maybe I wouldn't be the last. I whispered into the quiet, "If you made it out, show me how." It was a foolish thing to say, but something about speaking to the emptiness helped. The air seemed to listen. I took inventory: one tin can with a few drops of rainwater, the rusted cot leg I'd used as a cane, a torn magazine half melted by moisture. On the wall near the window, I saw carved initials, R+J, 2004. The carving was deep, deliberate. Two people had wanted the world to remember they'd existed, even here. I traced the letters with my fingertip and said their names aloud as if they were friends. When I finally stood, the room tilted. My mouth was dry as bark. I tipped the can and drank the last of the water. It tasted like metal and life. I caught a glimpse of myself in the broken window pane, mud-streaked hair, skin lined with grime and defiance. The woman staring back didn't look kind or soft or invisible. She looked dangerous. I liked her. Outside, the forest had changed color. Mist hung low, curling between the trunks like smoke. I gripped the cot leg and stepped forward. My knees screamed, but I ignored it. I needed water, food, direction. I needed proof that the world beyond the woods still remembered me. The path behind the cabin sloped down into a narrow ravine, tangled with roots and wild ferns. I moved carefully, sliding my feet through the mud. The sound of water grew louder, steady, rushing. My pulse matched it. When I reached the bottom, I saw a wider stream, fast and cold, cutting through the rock. Henry's voice echoed again. "Follow the water, Maggie. Rivers don't lie." He always called me Maggie. Even when I tried to insist on Margaret, said Maggie sounded like movement, like something alive. I followed the current westward. The sun broke through once, just long enough to remind me the world hadn't ended. My shoes were soaked, my clothes heavy, but the rhythm of walking became a kind of prayer. Every step meant one more inch between me and the grave they'd dug with their smiles. Around midday, I stopped to rest on a boulder. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely keep them still. I stared down at them and thought about David's hands, how he used to build model planes with Henry when he was 10, how steady and gentle he'd been. The memory hit like a knife. How do you reconcile the boy who once cried over a broken wing with the man who left you for dead? I closed my eyes and breathed through the ache. "You don't get to take that from me too," I whispered. I get to keep the part of you that was good. When I opened my eyes again, the sky was dimming. I needed shelter before nightfall. That's when I saw it, a narrow gap between two ridges, where the ground sloped upward. The air beyond it felt different, lighter. I climbed slowly, one foot dragging after the other. My vision blurred with exhaustion, but when I reached the crest, I saw it, the faint shimmer of metal in the distance. A road. I almost laughed. The sound came out cracked and wild. My knees buckled, and I sank to the dirt, clutching at the earth as if it were holy. You should have made sure I was dead, I said again, voice ragged. Because now I'm coming home. As the last light drained from the sky, I crawled back to the cabin to rest. I wasn't strong enough to reach the road yet, not tonight. The cold crept in early, biting at my fingers. I found the blanket stiff with mildew, wrapped it around myself, and lay back on the cot. The metal frame pressed into my bones, but I didn't care. I thought of home, of the house on Maple Lane, the lilac bush Henry planted, the chipped mailbox still bearing my name. I pictured David sitting at my kitchen table, telling his lies with that same easy confidence that used to charm every teacher. I pictured Camille's tears, perfect as glass beads, falling at just the right moment. Let them have their show, I thought. Let them cry and eat casseroles and accept condolences. Because tomorrow, I'd walk out of these woods, and when I did, I'd start taking back everything they'd stolen: my house, my name, my story. Outside, something howled again, closer this time, but I didn't flinch. I whispered into the dark, "You can come for me, world. You can try, but I've already been through worse." And when I finally closed my eyes, I dreamed not of death, but of headlights cutting through fog. I woke with the taste of rust in my mouth and a sound I couldn't name. Not birds, not wind, something deeper, rhythmic. For a moment, panic gripped me. I thought it was the forest changing its mind about letting me live. Then I realized it was a motor. A low hum carried through the trees like a heartbeat made of steel. Adrenaline hit me so hard my body forgot the pain. I stumbled to my feet, clutching the cot leg like a weapon. Morning fog ghosted through the cracks in the cabin, and sunlight cut faint, silver shapes on the floor. I followed the sound, step by dragging step, through ferns slick with dew. Each vibration in the ground felt like possibility, like the world calling me back. The forest gave way to a slope of mud and tangled roots. I half slid, half crawled down, my knees slamming against stone. I could see it now, gray through the trees, shining in the light. A road. Narrow, cracked, but real. Civilization's scar running through wilderness. When my feet hit asphalt, I dropped to my knees. The surface was warm, rough against my palms. I pressed my forehead to it and laughed, a sound so hoarse it startled a crow from a nearby branch. "You see?" I croaked to no one. "You didn't finish me." The motor sound was closer now. A truck rounded the bend, headlights off, moving slow. I staggered to my feet and waved both arms. For a terrifying second, it didn't stop. Then brakes screamed, gravel spat, and the vehicle shuddered to a halt a few yards away. A man jumped out, 40s, maybe 50s, sunburned and wary. His baseball cap read Lopez Auto and Tao. He froze when he saw me, eyes wide. "Jesus, lady," he said, "you okay?" I tried to answer, but my throat was a cracked desert. All that came out was a rasp. "Please, town." He hesitated. I could see him measuring the moment, deciding whether I was real or a ghost. Then he nodded once. "Get in." The truck smelled of oil and coffee. I slid onto the passenger seat, trembling so hard the door rattled. He handed me a bottle of water. I drank all of it in one breath, coughing when it burned down my throat. He drove in silence for a while, eyes flicking toward me but never lingering. Finally he said, "You lost?" Something inside me wanted to laugh, or maybe scream. Something like that. "Where'd you come from?" I looked out the window, trees blurred into streaks of green and gold. "The forest," I said, but not by choice. He didn't press. Maybe he'd seen too much of life's worst already. People like that recognize ghosts when they see them. When the road widened, he pointed ahead. "Town's 10 minutes. You got family?" I almost laughed again. "Not anymore." He nodded, like he understood. Maybe he did. People who drive lonely roads tend to know the shape of loss. As we neared Cedar Valley, I saw the gas station we'd passed that morning, its faded green sign, the soda machine out front humming weakly. Time had looped back on itself, cruel and perfect. "Drop me near there," I said. "You sure?" "Hospital's closer." "I'm sure." He slowed near the curb. The world outside the window looked so normal it hurt. Kids on bikes, a man hosing down a sidewalk, a woman carrying groceries. I'd been gone less than 3 days, but it felt like a century. When the truck stopped, he reached for his wallet, pulled out a business card. "If you need a tow or anything." I took it. "Thank you." He hesitated, then said quietly, "My mom got lost once. Took us 2 days to find her. We thought—" He trailed off. "Glad you made it out." I nodded. "So am I." When the truck drove away, I stood in the heat of the asphalt, watching the world spin like it hadn't missed me. Then I limped toward the Silver Fern Inn, the old roadside motel I remembered from years ago. Its sign flickered weakly, vacancy glowing half dead in red. The clerk didn't recognize me. Why would he? I was dirt-streaked, hollow-eyed, a ghost wearing human skin. "Need a room?" he asked, barely glancing up. "Yes," I said, "just a night." He slid a key across the counter without another word. Maybe he saw too many people running from something to ask anymore. In the small, stale room, I peeled off my shoes. My heels bled through my socks. I washed my face in cold water until the sink turned brown. Then I sat on the bed, staring at the blank TV screen. I could have called the police. I could have called anyone. But I didn't. Not yet. My body was alive, but my mind was still crawling out of the woods. On the nightstand was a notepad and a dull pencil. I pulled them close and began to write. Not a confession, not a letter, a list. What I gave them. $38,000 loan for David's real estate startup. The house title, for tax purposes. Power of attorney, signed 3 years ago. Insurance policy beneficiary, David Ellison. Camille's cosmetic surgery gift fund. Each line I wrote felt like tearing skin. I stared at the paper, shaking. For years, I told myself love meant giving, but now, all I could see were transactions. I wasn't a mother to them. I'd been an ATM with wrinkles. I folded the list and slipped it under my pillow. Tomorrow, I'd decide what to do. Tonight, I just needed to remember how to breathe without asking permission. As I lay down, I whispered to the ceiling, "You thought the woods would bury me. You were wrong." Sleep came slowly. When it did, it wasn't peaceful. It was electric, charged with something that felt dangerously close to power. I woke before dawn, heart pounding, disoriented by the sound of a dripping faucet. For a moment, I thought I was still in the forest, the same cold air, the same shadows pressing close, until I saw the faint orange glow of the motel sign bleeding through the curtains. Civilization had never felt so ugly or so miraculous. My reflection in the mirror startled me. My hair, once silver and neat, hung wild around my face. My eyes looked older, sharper. There was something in them that hadn't been there before, not fear, not even anger, just clarity. The kind that comes when you finally stop lying to yourself. I dressed in the same clothes, stiff with dried mud, and walked to the diner next door. The waitress, a girl barely older than 20, looked at me with polite concern. "You all right, ma'am?" she asked. "Coffee," I said. "Black." When the mug touched my hands, I nearly cried. The heat seared my palms, and it felt like proof that I still existed. I drank slow, savoring each bitter swallow. The girl smiled, and I managed a small one in return. For the first time in days, someone saw me without suspicion or motive, just a tired old woman drinking coffee. Across the street, the gas station was open. A man taped a new poster to the window. The word "missing" caught my eye. Beneath it, my face stared back smiling, cropped from a photo at David's wedding. Margaret Ellison, 72, last seen near Cedar Ridge Forest. My throat went dry. So, they were pretending. I stood and walked closer, pretending to tie my shoe until the man left. Up close, I saw the details. "Beloved mother and friend, please contact David Ellison at," and his phone number printed in bold. Beloved. I almost laughed. Behind the glass, the cashier caught my reflection. For a second, our eyes met. Recognition flickered, confusion, disbelief. He blinked, looked again. But by then, I'd already turned away, crossing the street as fast as my bad hip would allow. I could almost hear his voice forming the words. That looked like her. Let him wonder. I wasn't ready to be found. Back in my room, I pulled the motel's thin notepad toward me again. The list from last night stared back. I added new lines. They're lying to the police. They think I'm a ghost. I won't let them win. Then I began drafting a plan, not for revenge, but reclamation. My house, my accounts, my name. If I called the police now, David and Camille would spin their story first. Mom wandered off, they'd say. She's been confused lately. They'd weaponize my age, my grief, my silence. No, I wouldn't give them that chance. I would come back on my own terms. The bank would be my first step. My account manager, Richard Duncan, had handled my finances for 20 years. He was predictable, cautious, loyal to policy. He'd freeze every joint account once I proved who I was. After that, I'd find a lawyer, someone outside of David's reach, someone with teeth. I tucked the list into my purse. The rain had started again, soft and steady. I stepped outside, feeling it soak into my hair, my sleeves, the cracks in my shoes. It wasn't cleansing. It was grounding. When I reached the corner, I looked up and froze. Across from the motel stood a small community center, its signboard blinking under the drizzle. Tonight, memorial service for Margaret Ellison, beloved mother and friend. 7 p.m. The letters shimmered under the rain. My breath caught. So soon. A cruel, almost cinematic timing, like they couldn't wait to bury me twice. I walked closer, just to be sure. The poster taped to the door confirmed it. Candles, photos, celebrating her gentle heart. Gentle. That word felt like an insult now. I stood there for a long moment, reading my own obituary through the glass. Then I whispered, let them mourn. They'd built this little performance for themselves, an audience of neighbors and church friends, all ready to believe the fiction they'd written. I wouldn't stop them. I'd watch. I went back to my room, took off my muddy sweater, washed my hands until the water ran clear, and sat on the edge of the bed. If they were throwing a memorial for me, I was going to attend. Not as a ghost, as a witness. The rain thickened, drumming against the window. I stared at the mirror again, at the stranger looking back. You ready? I asked her. She didn't answer, but I saw something in her eyes that made me smile, a flash of quiet, lethal calm. Good, I said. Because tonight, we start taking it all back. By dusk, the sky was bruised purple, the kind of color that meant something was ending. I left the motel just after 6, wearing a borrowed cardigan from the front desk's lost and found. It smelled faintly of cigarettes and lilac soap. I didn't care. It made me look harmless again, exactly what I needed. The community center glowed like a lantern across the street. Windows steamed from the warmth inside. Through the glass, I could see flickering candles arranged around a framed photo of me smiling. Soft, the kind of woman people remember fondly because she never made a scene. I stood beneath the awning across the road and watched as the guests arrived in their Sunday best, arms full of casseroles and pity. There were neighbors from Maple Lane, women from the church choir, even the postmaster who used to wave at me every morning. They hugged each other and shook their heads, repeating the same words. So tragic, such a sweet woman, poor David. And then, like clockwork, my son appeared. David looked better than grief should have allowed, clean-shaven, neatly dressed, his hair slicked back the way he always did when he was about to lie. Camille was beside him, draped in black like a soap opera widow. Her makeup was flawless. She held a box of tissues she didn't use once. I stood in the shadows, invisible, while they performed. David stepped to the front of the room, hands folded like a preacher's. "Thank you all for coming," he began, voice trembling just enough to sound sincere. My mother is, the kind of woman who gave everything to everyone. She deserved better than this. Gave everything. I almost applauded. At least he was honest about that part. He spoke for another 5 minutes, stories about my kindness, my patience, my gentle soul. Camille sniffled at the right moments, dabbing the corners of her eyes with her tissue box prop. Then came the slideshow. Photos flickered across the screen. Me in the garden, me holding David as a baby, me and Henry smiling on our wedding day. It was like watching my own life staged as evidence for their innocence. When the lights came back on, people moved to comfort them. A woman from the neighborhood hugged Camille and whispered something. Camille nodded solemnly, squeezing her hand in that way she used when she wanted people to feel special. David pretended to choke back tears. The crowd murmured, a chorus of sympathy for the two grieving saints who'd orphaned themselves by design. I stayed until the candles began to gutter. When they finally stepped outside, I slipped around the corner of the building and watched them from the shadows. They were laughing. Quietly, but laughing. Camille's voice carried across the parking lot. "We actually pulled it off," she said. "Can you believe it?" David didn't answer. He just glanced around, restless. For a heartbeat, his eyes skimmed the darkness where I stood. I held my breath. He looked right through me. When they got into the car, I stepped forward just enough for the taillights to catch my face. Red light washed over me, brief, ghostly. I wanted him to see me, to feel that flicker of doubt crawl up his spine. But he didn't look back. They drove away, tires crunching on gravel. I let the silence close around me. Somewhere behind me, a door creaked open. "Ma'am?" It was one of the choir ladies, locking up. Her face went pale when she saw me. She blinked, rubbed her eyes like she was seeing something she shouldn't. "Lord have mercy," she whispered. "You look like I've been through hell," I said. "Don't worry." I came back. Her mouth opened and closed. "But you're alive," I smiled faintly. "Don't tell them yet." She didn't. Maybe she thought I was a hallucination sent by guilt. Maybe she was smart enough to stay silent. Either way, I disappeared before she could follow me. Back in the motel, I peeled off the cardigan and sat by the window. Across the parking lot, neon buzzed against the rain. I pulled my list from under the pillow and read it again. My hands were steady now. The fear was gone. Tomorrow, I'd go to the bank, then the lawyer. I'd start unspooling the web they'd built from my trust and their greed. For tonight, I watched the rain blur the world into streaks of silver and shadow. It looked almost beautiful, like the forest's ghost had followed me home to watch the show. "Let them think they buried me," I whispered. "Tomorrow, they'll find out I was just taking root." The next morning, the world was all gray edges and wet light. Rain fell steady, thin as thread. I dressed in the same clothes but tied my hair back, the way I used to when I worked at the library, pulled together, capable, forgettable. People underestimate women who look like they're holding themselves together by habit. That's how we survive. The Cedar Valley Bank opened at 9. I was there at 8:45, waiting beneath the awning with the patience of someone who'd already outwaited death. When the doors unlocked, I stepped inside, the scent of disinfectant and paper thick in the air. The young teller's smile froze halfway when she saw me. My face was on their bulletin board, right beside the flyers for community yard sales and missing pets. Missing person. Margaret Ellison, 72. Reward for information. "Ma'am," she said slowly, eyes darting to the poster, then back to me. "Can I help you?" "Yes," I said evenly. "I'd like to see Richard Duncan. Tell him Margaret Ellison is here to review her accounts." Her hand hovered above the phone. She was probably deciding whether to call security or faint. I didn't blame her. Ghosts don't often walk into banks before breakfast. When Richard finally appeared, he looked like he'd seen a ghost too, though to be fair, he had. His coffee cup hit the desk before he could set it down. Mrs. Ellison. My God!" "Alive," I interrupted, "and I'd like to sit down." He ushered me into his office, still pale. The glass walls made the moment feel like theater me, the apparition, and him, the audience trapped in disbelief. I don't understand," he stammered. "Your son filed—" "I'm aware," I said. "He filed the insurance claim, didn't he?" Richard swallowed. 2 days after your disappearance, he brought in all the paperwork. He said they'd found your scarf near the creek. The lie was so casual, it almost impressed me. "We're going to reverse every transaction tied to him," I said. "Every joint account, every transfer, every authority. Effective immediately." He hesitated. "Of course, but we'll need verification." I slid my driver's license across the desk, mud-stained but intact. "I have my birth certificate, medical report from urgent care, and police documentation of survival. Is that enough verification, Richard?" He nodded quickly, flustered. "Yes, ma'am, of course. I'll handle this personally." When I left the office an hour later, the air outside felt different, lighter, sharper. For the first time since the woods, I'd taken something back. Not just money, power. The kind that can't be signed away. But power without direction is just noise. I needed someone who could turn my fury into law. That's how I met Nadia Flores. She didn't look like the lawyers I remembered from Henry's time. No gray suits, no quiet condescension. She wore dark jeans, a black jacket, and glasses that made her eyes look sharp enough to cut glass. Her office sat above a bakery that smelled like cinnamon and salt. The sign on her door read, Flores and Associates, Family Law, Estate Protection, Elder Advocacy. "I hear you're the woman who came back from the dead," she said when I walked in. I smiled faintly. "I hear you take cases people don't believe in, only when they're worth believing." She listened as I told her everything, each detail, from the picnic to the motel to the memorial. She didn't interrupt, didn't pity me. She took notes with a calm precision that made me feel steadier just sitting there. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair, tapping her pen against her notebook. "You realize what this is, right?" she said. "This isn't just fraud, it's attempted homicide." "I'm aware," I said quietly. "But I'm not looking for revenge." "Good," she said. "Revenge is messy, justice is cleaner." Nadia promised to file emergency motions to freeze assets and restore ownership of my home. "We'll build your case piece by piece," she said. "But for now, I need proof of identity, medical documentation, bank confirmation, and already have all three." I slid the folder across the desk. She raised an eyebrow. "You're thorough." "I used to catalog entire libraries," I said. "I don't misplace evidence." Her smile was small but genuine. "Then we'll make sure your son never touches another dime of yours." As I left, the scent of baked bread followed me down the stairs. Outside, the rain had stopped. The street glistened like glass. For a moment, I felt the strange sensation of being back in my own story again. That evening, I returned to the motel, the manila folder tucked under my arm. I spread the documents out across the bed, bank statements, policy forms, notarized records. Each page was a resurrection, proof that I was still here, still fighting. I didn't eat dinner, I didn't turn on the light, I just sat there and read until my eyes blurred. Tomorrow, I'd face them. Not yet in person, but soon. The law would make the first move. I whispered to the stack of papers, the way I once whispered bedtime stories to David when he was small. Once upon a time, a woman went into the woods and came back whole. And this time, I meant it. The courthouse in Cedar Valley looked like every courthouse I'd ever known, too cold, too polished, as if grief and justice couldn't share the same air. I stood at the bottom of its granite steps, the wind tugging at my sleeves, Nadia's folder pressed against my chest. This wasn't just a building, it was the mouth of something bigger. And I was walking straight into it. Inside, everything smelled faintly of lemon polish and paper dust. Nadia was waiting by the security checkpoint, her hair tied back, calm as always. "Ready?" she asked. "More than I've ever been." The clerk led us to a narrow courtroom. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. At one table, my table, sat Nadia and me. At the other, David and Camille. For a moment, no one spoke. My son's face went white as chalk. His lips parted, but no sound came out. Camille just stared, her mouth frozen in a polite half-smile, as if refusing to acknowledge what she saw might make it untrue. The judge cleared her throat. "This hearing concerns the verification of identity for Mrs. Margaret Ellison and the management of property and assets currently in dispute." Her voice was measured, but her eyes flicked between me and the two of them, like she already knew what kind of story this was. I stood, my palms steady on the table. "Your Honor, I am Margaret Ellison. I was not lost. I was abandoned." David's voice cracked. This can't be real. She's confused." She wandered off. "No," I said softly, and the word carried more weight than any shout. "You left me." Camille's jaw clenched. "We thought you were missing. You filed an insurance claim before you reported it," Nadia interrupted, her tone surgical. 2 days before, in fact. I have the documents." The judge lifted a brow. "Is that true?" Camille shifted in her seat. "There must be some misunderstanding." "There's always a misunderstanding," I said, "until the truth walks into the room." Nadia slid the evidence forward: bank statements, notarized affidavits, my medical report. Every page landed on the desk like a hammer. I watched the judge's expression change from curiosity to something closer to disbelief. She turned toward me. "Mrs. Ellison, you're certain of your claim?" "I lived it," I said. Silence filled the room, thick, electric. Somewhere behind me, the clock ticked too loudly. The judge exhaled slowly. "This court recognizes Mrs. Ellison as legally alive and in full capacity to manage her own estate, effective immediately." She glanced at my son. "All powers of attorney and shared financial privileges are hereby revoked." Nadia's pen clicked once, a sound of victory. David slumped back, his face ashen. Camille didn't move. Her eyes darted toward the exit, but she didn't get up. I watched her shoulders tighten, like she was holding back words she couldn't polish into charm. The judge banged her gavel lightly. "That concludes today's verification. Further hearings may be scheduled, pending review of the insurance filing." And just like that, the lie they'd built began to collapse. Outside the courtroom, the light was too bright. Nadia walked beside me, calm but alert. "You did it," she said. I shook my head. "No, we started it. What's next?" "I want my house." She nodded. "Then that's what we'll do." As we walked down the steps, I heard footsteps behind us. David's voice, low and desperate. "Mom." I turned. He looked smaller than I remembered. "Why?" he asked, his voice breaking. "Why are you doing this?" "Because you already did," I said. Camille stood a few paces behind him, eyes like glass. I almost pitied her, almost. Then I remembered the picnic basket, the hum of the engine, the silence after. I stepped closer to him. "You made me a ghost, David, but ghosts have nothing left to lose." He flinched like I'd struck him. I didn't wait for his answer. That afternoon, Nadia and I drove across town to file the property restoration. The rain had started again, soft and relentless. I watched it blur the windshield until the world looked half erased. Maybe that's what justice really was, not fireworks or closure, but clarity after the storm. When I got back to the motel, I opened the curtains and let the gray light in. My reflection in the window looked steady now, not unbroken but whole. I whispered, "You thought I'd die quietly. You forgot who raised you." For the first time since the woods, I believed my own voice. The morning we went to reclaim the house, the sky hung low, swollen with rain. It felt like the world itself was holding its breath. Nadia drove. I sat in silence beside her, watching the familiar streets roll past Maple Lane, the bakery Henry loved, the corner lot where David used to sell lemonade in summer. Every landmark looked the same, but the air felt altered, thinner, as if the town knew what was coming. We turned onto my street just as thunder rumbled in the distance. There it was, my house. My lilac bushes stood untrimmed, wild and heavy with gray leaves. The porch lights were on, though it was morning, a small, stupid attempt at control. They'd even hung wind chimes. They tinkled like nervous laughter. A sheriff's deputy waited by the curb, cap pulled low, posture straight but kind. He greeted Nadia first, then me. "Mrs. Ellison, I'm Deputy Marks. We'll proceed according to the court's order. You can wait in the car until they're finished gathering their things." I shook my head. "No, I want to see." He hesitated, then nodded. "All right, ma'am, stay behind me." The three of us approached the porch. My cane clicked against the wood I'd varnished with Henry 30 years ago. I could still feel where his hand had guided mine, steady and sure. The door opened before we could knock. Camille stood there barefoot, wearing leggings and one of David's old shirts, her hair tied up carelessly. She blinked once, and for the briefest moment, her face went pale, not with shock, but with fury contained too long. "What is this?" she asked flatly. Nadia's voice was calm, precise. "Legal eviction under emergency restoration of property. You've been notified, Mrs. Ellison. Time's up." "Mrs. Ellison?" Camille repeated with a small, poisonous laugh. "You mean her?" "Yes," Nadia said, unflinching. "The rightful owner." Camille's mouth twisted. "You have no idea what you're doing. She's confused. She's alive," I said. David appeared in the hallway behind her, hair disheveled, eyes sunken. He looked like a man waking from a dream that had gone bad halfway through. "Mom," he started. "We were going to call—" "You had 5 days," I said. "You called the insurance company instead." He flinched. Camille's glare sharpened, but she stayed quiet. Deputy Marks cleared his throat. "You've got 20 minutes to collect your belongings." Camille crossed her arms. "You think this makes you noble?" she hissed. You think anyone's going to care? Nadia looked at her evenly. I don't think caring is the goal. I met Camille's eyes. You should pack faster. Storm's coming. They slammed the door in our faces, but through the thin wood I heard drawers slamming, boxes thumping, their panic vibrating like static through the walls. I turned away from the porch and sat on the top step, the rain beginning to fall in thin, cold lines. The scent of lilac and wet earth filled the air. You want to go inside when they're gone? Nadia asked softly. I nodded. I need to. We waited in silence until the door opened again. Camille stormed out first, dragging a suitcase and muttering under her breath. David followed, carrying a duffel bag, his face ghost pale. He stopped halfway down the steps and looked at me, not defiant, not apologetic, just empty. You could have talked to me, he said quietly. I did, I replied. You stopped listening. He swallowed, his jaw tightening, then turned and walked to the car. Camille didn't look back. When their taillights disappeared around the corner, the street fell silent, except for the rain. Nadia glanced at me. You ready? I stood slowly. I've been ready for years. Inside, the air was thick with their perfume and falsehood. The curtains were new, beige and bloodless. My blue teapot was gone. The photo wall I'd built of birthdays and road trips and Christmas mornings had been replaced with minimalist art trees, quotes about family and scripted letters. One read, "Home is where love begins." I took it off the wall and set it gently on the counter. No, I said aloud. Home is where truth ends their lies. The kitchen smelled faintly of vanilla candles. I walked to the sink, turned the tap on, let the water run. The sound filled the silence like music. Nadia watched me from the doorway, saying nothing. Do you want me to stay while you look around? She asked. I shook my head. No, this part I need to do alone. She nodded once, her respect wordless, and stepped outside. I walked through each room slowly. My hand brushed the wall where Henry had measured David's height each year, the pencil marks now painted over in sterile gray. I scraped one patch with my nail until the faintest line reappeared. David, age 6. My throat tightened, but I didn't cry. The tears had long turned to resolve. In the bedroom, I found something unexpected, a frame hidden behind the dresser, dust coating the glass. It was an old photo of Henry and me, taken on the porch our first summer here. His arm around my shoulders, my smile too wide for the camera. Behind it, taped to the backboard, a folded piece of paper, his handwriting. If you ever feel forgotten, Maggie, remember the woods only test those who are meant to find their way out. I sank onto the edge of the bed, the note trembling in my hands. The rain outside grew harder, hammering the roof like applause. He'd always known I'd survive anything. I hadn't believed him until now. When I finally opened the windows, the wind rushed in, sweeping the scent of lilac through the house. For the first time in years, it smelled like mine. 3 days later, the doorbell rang just after sunrise. I wasn't expecting anyone. Most people in Cedar Valley still thought I was dead. I wiped my hands on a dish towel, half expecting it to be Nadia with more paperwork. When I opened the door, a voice I hadn't heard in years said, "Grandma?" It was Ella. For a moment, the world stilled. She looked different, older, of course. 25 now, maybe 26. Her hair was darker, cut shorter than I remembered, her eyes the same sharp hazel as Henry's. A small suitcase rested by her feet, damp from the morning mist. I couldn't speak. The last time I'd seen her, she was 20, leaving for college, promising to visit. Then the distance grew, stretched thin by silence, and Camille's careful control of the family narrative. I thought, she started, voice breaking. They said you were. I know, I said softly. They lied. She pressed her lips together, then stepped forward and wrapped her arms around me. Her hug was tight, desperate, real. For the first time since the forest, I felt the weight of another human heartbeat against mine. When she pulled back, her eyes were wet but steady. I didn't believe them, she said. Not really. I kept looking online, checking for updates. It didn't make sense that you'd just vanish. Sometimes, I said, people vanish because others want them gone. We stood in the doorway for a long moment before I led her inside. She paused at the threshold, scanning the house, the beige curtains, the stripped walls, the faint scent of bleach. They changed everything, she whispered. They tried to. She dropped her bag, looked at me, and smiled through her tears. you're really here." "I am," I said, "and I plan to stay." We spent the morning in the kitchen, the same one Camille had once scrubbed of every trace of me. The kettle was dented but functional, a stand-in for the one she'd thrown out. I made tea while Ella unpacked a small notebook from her bag. "I started writing about you," she said. "After they told me you were gone, I didn't know if I'd ever show anyone, but I couldn't stop." I poured the tea, curious. "What did you write?" She opened the book to the first page, her handwriting small and neat. Then she read aloud. She was the only person who ever made silence feel safe. She smelled like books and lemon soap, and when she laughed, it sounded like a promise you could believe in. The words blurred through my tears before I even realized I was crying. I reached across the table and took her hand. "You remembered me?" I whispered. "I always did," she said. "I just didn't know where to find you." We sat like that for a while, steam rising from our cups. Then she asked, "What happened, Grandma? Really?" So I told her, not as a story, but as a confession. The picnic, the truck, the silence that followed, the days in the forest, the cabin, the road, the motel room, the memorial, the courtroom. Every detail, every bruise, every betrayal. She didn't interrupt. She didn't look away. When I finished, she sat back, her hands trembling around her mug. "I knew something was wrong," she said. "Even when I was little. Dad and Camille, they always made everything about them." Her voice cracked. "I'm sorry. I should have called. I should have visited." I shook my head. "You couldn't have known. They controlled everything. That's what people like them do. They isolate you until silence feels like love." She nodded slowly, eyes wet. "Not anymore." I smiled. "No, not anymore." We spent the afternoon rearranging the living room. I let her choose the order of the furniture, the way she used to when she was a child pretending to play house. She found one of my old quilts in the attic. Camille had stuffed it into a donation box and draped it over the couch. When the sun began to dip, she said quietly, "I want to stay for a few days. If that's okay." "You can stay as long as you need," I said. "As long as you want." That night, we made popcorn in an old saucepan and watched a movie on my laptop. Halfway through, she fell asleep, curled under the quilt, her head resting on the armrest. I turned down the volume and watched her breathe, the rhythm steady, alive. The house felt different now, no longer haunted by what was taken, but warmed by what had returned. I thought of the forest again, the way I'd followed the sound of water until it became salvation. That's what this was, my current finding its way back to the river. I whispered to the dark. Some things lost are only waiting to be found by the right hands. And for the first time since Henry died, I believed that might include me. 2 days after Ella arrived, my phone rang just past noon. The number was unfamiliar but local. I almost didn't answer. The last time I trusted a voice on the line, it led me into the woods. But something in me, the new, harder part, picked up anyway. "Mrs. Ellison?" a man said. His tone was calm, clipped, official. "This is Detective Aaron Cole from the Cedar Valley Police Department. Do you have a moment?" I felt Ella's gaze lift from across the kitchen table. She was cutting up lemons for tea, her knife pausing mid-air. "Yes," I said. "I've been expecting your call." Cole cleared his throat. "We've received your lawyer's filing and the medical report confirming your survival. I'd like you to come in to give a full statement. I understand this may be difficult, but the sooner we begin, the stronger the case." "I'll be there in an hour," I said. When I hung up, Ella's face had gone pale. "They're really investigating?" "Yes." I folded the dish towel carefully. "It's time." She hesitated. "Do you want me to come with you?" I smiled faintly. "No, this part, I need to do alone." The police station smelled of old coffee and copier ink. The fluorescent lights hummed like distant bees. Detective Cole was younger than I expected, mid-30s maybe. His expression was neutral but not unkind. He motioned for me to sit. A recorder blinked red on the desk between us. "This will be an official statement," he said. "Do I have your consent to record?" "You do." He pressed a button. "Please state your full name for the record." "Margaret June Ellison," I said clearly. 70, 2 years old. Resident of Cedar Valley, Oregon. Survivor. He looked up at that last word, but didn't comment. "Tell me what happened." So I did. I told him about the picnic, the excuses, the sound of the truck starting, the way the forest swallowed the noise. I told him about the first night, how silence became a kind of companion, about the creek, the cabin, the hunger, the hallucinations. I told him about Ray Lopez, the tow truck driver who found me, and the motel where I made my list. As I spoke, I realized I wasn't trembling anymore. Each word came sharp, deliberate, like I was laying bricks over a grave. When I finished, Cole leaned back, exhaling slowly. "You understand, Mrs. Ellison, this is more than abandonment. If we can prove intent removal of your phone, insurance filing, timing, it becomes attempted homicide." "I understand," I said, "and I want it investigated properly." He nodded. "We'll need to collect statements, verify evidence, trace financials. It may take time." "I've had time," I said. "Years of it." He studied me for a moment. "You're remarkably calm. I already survived the worst part." He smiled faintly, more respect than amusement. "I'll be in touch within 48 hours. I stood. "Detective," I added softly, "don't let them call it a misunderstanding. They knew exactly what they were doing." He nodded once. "Yes, ma'am." Outside, the air was crisp and bright. I didn't go straight home. Instead, I walked 2 blocks to a coffee shop Henry and I used to visit. The same chipped ceramic mugs, the same faded chalkboard menu. I ordered black coffee, sat by the window, and watched the street move, normal life continuing without apology. It was strange, this quiet. I'd spent so long fighting just to exist again that the world's indifference felt almost merciful. When my phone buzzed, I jumped. "The number again, Detective Cole," I answered. "Mrs. Ellison," he said. "We've reviewed the claim file. It was submitted 2 days after you went missing. Your son's signature, his wife listed as witness." For a moment, all sound disappeared. Even the chatter of the cafe faded. "Thank you," I said finally. "That's what I needed to hear." "Do you want to press charges?" he asked. I stared out the window at a mother walking with her child, holding his hand tightly. "No," I said slowly. "I don't want revenge. I want truth. Let the truth do what it always does. It finds its way out." He was silent a moment, then said quietly, "You're stronger than most people I meet in this job." "No," I said, "just older. There's a difference." When I returned home, Ella was sitting on the porch steps with her notebook in her lap. "How'd it go?" she asked. "They listened," I said. "For once, they really listened." She smiled faintly. "Are you scared?" I thought about it. "No. I think I'm done being scared of people who need my silence to feel safe." Ella reached for my hand. "Then you're not just my grandmother," she said softly. "You're proof." "Proof of what?" "That you can come back from anything." We sat there as the light turned gold. The wind carried the scent of wet lilacs through the yard. I closed my eyes and let it wash over me. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like a survivor. I felt like a witness. The letter from the county arrived 3 days later, tucked neatly between the electric bill and a flyer for gutter cleaning. The envelope was thick official paper, no nonsense. My name, Margaret J. Ellison, printed in stark black ink across the front. I didn't open it right away. I brewed a cup of tea first, the way I always did when the past came knocking. The kettle whistled softly, and the house smelled like chamomile and lemon peel. When I finally slid the blade of my kitchen knife through the envelope seam, my hands didn't shake. Not this time. Subpoena. The word looked almost elegant at the top of the page. The hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks from Monday. Preliminary, not criminal yet, but the start of something irreversible. Witness required. I folded the letter once and set it on the table. The quiet that followed was heavy but not unbearable. Ella came downstairs a few minutes later, her hair pulled into a messy bun, still wearing the sweatshirt she'd borrowed from me. She stopped when she saw the letter. "Is that?" "Yes," I said. "It's beginning." Her face softened with something between pride and fear. "Do you have to go?" "Yes." I sipped my tea. "If I don't, they win twice, once in the woods and once in the world." The days leading up to the hearing blurred together like slow rain. Nadia came by each afternoon, spreading files across the kitchen table while Ella took notes. "They'll try to spin it," Nadia warned. "Say you were confused, that they thought you'd wandered off. They'll bring up your age, your memory, anything to shake credibility." I smiled faintly. "They can question my mind all they want. The forest already tested it." She smirked. "Then let them try. Each night, I practiced my testimony aloud, clear, calm, unbroken. No trembling, no tears, only truth. Ella sometimes sat on the porch steps, listening quietly, her notebook closed on her lap. I caught her once, mouthing the words with me, like a prayer we both needed. By the morning of the hearing, the sky was brittle blue. I dressed in a simple navy blouse and the pearl earrings Henry had given me on our 15th anniversary. No armor, just history. When we arrived, Nadia handed me a folder. "You ready?" "I've been ready since they drove away." The courtroom was smaller than the first. No cameras, no crowd, just polished benches and that humming silence that comes before reckoning. David and Camille sat across from me, their lawyer between them, his tie too bright, his confidence already cracking. The judge entered, gavel down. "This hearing concerns the legitimacy of an insurance claim filed under the name of Margaret Ellison, presumed deceased and later confirmed alive. The court will hear testimony to determine whether sufficient grounds exist for referral to the district attorney." He turned to me. "Mrs. Ellison, you may begin." I rose slowly. My knees ached, but my voice did not. "I went into the woods with my son and his wife on October 18th. I began. They told me to wait by the log while they retrieved the picnic basket. Then I heard the truck start. They did not come back." Camille shifted in her seat. David looked down at his hands. "I waited 12 hours. I continued. "I crawled for 2 days. I found a road. I survived. When I returned, I discovered an insurance claim had already been filed in my name. That is not grief. That is preparation." The judge's pen stopped moving. The air in the room thickened. David's lawyer stood. "Mrs. Ellison, with all due respect, is it possible your recollection is colored by trauma? That perhaps your son and daughter-in-law simply misjudged the situation?" I looked straight at him. "Trauma sharpens memory, counselor. It burns away the irrelevant. I remember everything." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. The judge raised a hand for silence. "Proceed." I leaned forward, voice low but steady. "They didn't forget me. They left me. And then they profited from it." Nadia slid a file onto the table, the insurance papers, the bank transfers, the timestamps. Facts don't need volume to cut deep. The judge reviewed them quietly, his expression hardening. When it was David's turn, he rose with trembling hands. "We thought she was gone," he stammered. "We panicked. It was a mistake." The judge's eyes narrowed. "A mistake is calling the wrong number. You filed a death claim 2 days after her disappearance." David faltered. Camille's eyes darted to him, sharp as glass. Their lawyer whispered something frantic, but the room had already decided. The gavel struck once. "This court finds sufficient cause for referral to the district attorney under grounds of fraud, elder abuse, and attempted homicide. Proceedings will continue." The sound echoed through the chamber like a gunshot. I exhaled slowly. Nadia touched my arm. "It's done," she whispered. "No," I said. "It's beginning." Outside, the afternoon light spilled gold across the courthouse steps. Ella was waiting by the car, hands clasped tight. When she saw my face, she didn't ask. She just hugged me. "They know," I murmured into her hair. "The world knows." "Good," she said fiercely. "Let them feel what silence sounds like." We drove home with the windows down. The wind smelled like rain and lilacs. For the first time, the town didn't feel like a cage. It felt like a witness. It was late afternoon when they came. I was sweeping the front porch, something I'd begun to do every evening, the slow rhythm reminding me that this home, this air, this life was mine again. The sun was low, bleeding through the clouds in strips of copper light. From the corner of my eye, I saw the car before I heard it dark blue, the same one David used to drive. The tires crunched against the gravel. They parked at the curb, but didn't get out right away. I didn't move either. I just leaned on the broom handle, waiting. Finally, the car doors opened. David stepped out first, his face thinner, older. Camille followed, hiding behind sunglasses even though the light was fading. She folded her arms, defensive even before a word was spoken. For a long time, no one said anything. The only sound was the wind stirring the lilac branches. Then David took a slow step forward. "Mom," he said, and the words sounded foreign in his mouth. "Can we talk?" I kept my eyes on the horizon. "About what?" He shifted his weight. "About everything. About what happened. We made mistakes. You didn't make mistakes, I said evenly. You made choices. His shoulders sagged. You don't understand. I understand perfectly, I interrupted. I just don't excuse it. Camille let out a sharp, nervous laugh. God, you're still so dramatic. You almost died and you still want to play the martyr. I turned my gaze on her. No, Camille, you don't almost leave someone to die. You either do or you don't. Her lips pressed into a thin line. She looked away, but her jaw trembled. David ran a hand through his hair. I thought maybe you could forgive us. Start over. Forgiveness, I said softly, is for people who admit they were wrong. You're asking me to forget. He winced, his mouth opening, then closing again. The silence stretched between us like glass, fragile and sharp. Camille spoke finally, voice tight. We just came to see if you'd drop the charges. The stress, it's killing us. I let out a dry laugh. Stress has a way of introducing people to what they've done. You're cruel, she snapped. We were scared. You're not the only victim here. That was when I felt something deep in me settle, a kind of stillness that wasn't anger anymore, but truth. I set the broom against the railing and took a single step toward them. You left me in the woods to die, I said. You took my phone, my ID, my money. You filed paperwork to profit from my corpse. And now, you want to call that fear? I shook my head. You don't know fear. Fear is crawling through the dark for water with your own blood in your mouth. Fear is waking up alive when you were supposed to be gone. David's eyes glistened. He opened his mouth, but no words came. Camille turned sharply, walking back toward the car. Come on, she said, her voice cracking. This was a mistake. David lingered a moment longer, looking at me the way a child looks at a parent after breaking something they can't replace. Then he nodded once, quietly. I loved you, he whispered. I nodded back. Once. He got into the car. They drove off without another word. The tires spat dust into the golden light and vanished around the corner. I stood there a long time after they were gone, watching the road until the wind smoothed away the tracks. The world was quiet again, but it wasn't the silence of the woods. It was peace, the earned kind. When I went back inside, Ella was standing by the kitchen window. They were here, she said. They were, I replied, and now they're gone. She studied my face. Did it help? I thought about it. No, but it didn't hurt either. We went out onto the porch together, the lilacs trembling in the evening breeze. The sky was streaked with violet and gold. Ella leaned her head on my shoulder. What now? She asked. Now, I said. We live. Not as ghosts, not as victims, just alive. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of the blooming lilacs, sweet, clean, stubborn. I closed my eyes and breathed it in. The forest, the pain, the betrayal, all of it had led here, to this quiet, unremarkable moment of peace. Some things don't end with forgiveness. Some end with freedom. I glanced at Ella, her hair lit gold by the sunset. You keep the door locked, I said softly, but always leave the window open. She smiled. Why? So the light can find its way back in. The first star appeared above the trees. The house creaked like it was remembering how to breathe again. For the first time since that morning in the woods, I felt whole, not because justice had come, but because I had. To anyone who would ever read my story, I wanted to say this. They might forget you. They might bury you. They might smile while they do it. But you are not done unless you say so. You can crawl out of the dark, even if no one waits at the edge. You can build again. Softer, wiser, stronger. You get to keep your name. Especially then. So take it. Take it all back. And when they ask how you did it, say nothing. Just live.